I'm going to focus on things that are different, as we all have been doing today. And the first thing that's different, of course, are the special provisions for prior code buildings. I'm not going to talk to you about that anymore, but that's the first thing you'll see. Let's talk about some definitions. Okay, so I'm in BC 9. Fire area is now being clarified to include roofed areas that are not enclosed. So overhangs of buildings over other spaces. That becomes important if you're calculating fire areas, how large an area before you need sprinklers, those kinds of things. That's from the IBC. We're just following what the IBC did. The term fire pump now matches the electrical code and with respect to a automatic standpipe fire pump, a limited service fire pump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you who are fire protection engineers, that may be more important than others. Okay, so the heat detector now makes it clear that the activation can be a fixed temperature or a rate of rise. And that's important when you're talking about different types of environments where you need to select the right kind of detector so you avoid those false alarms. The supervising station definition now matches the rest of NFPA 72. It's not New York City special lingo anymore. The central supervising station, and we'll still call it supervising station, or a central station we'll call it, that's where it goes directly to the fire department. The proprietary station, proprietary supervising station, that's like in a hospital where you have someone monitoring it all day long. And then the remote supervising station, we don't use much in our codes, but that's when it goes to a home burglar alarm company for a single family house. But we're using the lingo and the language of NFPA 72 for the first time, which is a good thing. Our code in 903.2 in the building code now explicitly states no sprinklers in the elevator machine rooms or elevator machinery spaces. There are some new sprinkler triggers that did not exist in the 2008 code to keep up with the IBC and with our committee changes. One of them is for the ambulatory healthcare facilities that Mr. Communer mentioned earlier. These are facilities where you may be under sedation for a period of time, but it's not like a hospital. It's kind of in between, and that might require sprinklers or some other fire protection features instead, but you can read that. There are some new requirements for commercial truck and bus repair garages, and certain S1. S1 is storage, and S1 is the combustible storage, the storage that's much more flammable, and there's a new sprinkler requirement for that, so you can be on the lookout for those. Now, some of you may remember this bulletin that we issued to give cross-references to other parts of the code that have sprinkler requirements because they weren't all classified. We're getting rid of that. This code provision supersedes it because the code actually lists in a table format all the other places you might need sprinklers from other parts of the world. Okay, so if you happen to be designing an aerosol warehouse, you should know that the fire code requires sprinklers. If you're doing an atrium, BC 404 requires sprinklers. If you're doing a combustible fiber storage at waterfront structures, the fire code has a special sprinkler provision for you. Okay? So this is meant to demystify and put in one place all those various provisions from the new 2014 fire code, the New York City building code, and you can look here and see what kind of suppression you might require. And it's not just this long. The next slide is not meant for your reading. It's too small to read on purpose. That's how long it is. Those are all the places that we found sprinkler provisions in other codes, and you can look there in 903.2 and see that list. Because remember how 903.2 works. It says, oh, in assembly occupancies, you need sprinklers in these cases. You need business occupancies, you need sprinklers in these cases. In mercantile, you need them in these places. And then at the end, it says, and there's some others. And this is where you find that table, and then you look for your aerosol warehouses, etc. It tells you right there. Okay, so hose cabinets. In the 2008 code, we required a locked hose cabinet at the main entrance floor, and then for your class 3 standpipes, you wouldn't need the extra hose cabinets all up and down the building. Now there's a new requirement that you have to have one at least every 10 stories of a hose cabinet. Okay, fire department was very adamant about that. New standpipe locations. If you happen to be designing an assembly space with a stage and greater than 1,000 people, you must have a standpipe location that didn't exist before. For a marina or a boatyard, there are certain provisions that are in the fire code, but we send you there, and in certain covered malls. Okay, so with fire alarm systems. Now, I will say that ACEC did do a series of presentation on more mechanically oriented sessions explaining things like mechanical systems, fire alarm systems, all those things. I'm not going to go through all of NFPA 72 with you. I'm not going to go through all of the fire alarm provisions. I don't know that all of you could handle that or that I would say it properly. But what I will say is that this requires the drawings to be updated before they're signed off for your fire alarms. The fire department, of course, is going to continue to do their reviews, but that's what the code here says. Okay, so voice alarm communication systems. There are a few new provisions here and some clarifications with respect to a group A. We know that's assembly occupancy with a stage and greater than 75 occupants. You can have a stage. You might be required under this provision. You'll look it up and see if it needs to have a communication system. A group I2 are hospitals and nursing homes, and large group B that are less than 75 feet high. We already had the voice communication system for the high-rise group business, but not for the large footprint business. Group M, that's a mercantile, 100,000 square feet, and cover malls greater than 50,000 square feet. And group R1, those are hotels with greater than 50 rooms or lodges above the street level. A voice communication system, a voice alarm communication system. Now, in I1 occupancies, I1 are assisted living. That's the provision of personal care services to people in residential environments, basically assisted living. Previously, they were permitted to have smoke alarms locally ringing inside the dwelling units. This no-code provision will treat them similar to the R1, where a detector in the apartment will ring to a supervised location. So a little bit of difference there. Okay, so now ARCs. ARCs, you'll hear the fire department talk about ARCs. Auxiliary radio communication systems. These will allow the radios to repeat through the buildings. The requirement is that they be provided in the high-rise buildings. The fire department is working out their rules and how that's going to happen. They had issued a tech management bulletin on this explaining how that is to be designed. They are revising that, so I urge you, if you're designing high-rise buildings, if you are the fire protection engineer and you're dealing with these kinds of things, to understand what that means for your projects and follow up with the fire department on it. I've listed here the code sections that point you to it, and there you go. Okay, so the old two-way warden phones, we call them warden phones for the floor wardens to call up and down, they'll now be required, but only in a few places. High-rise and large area group Bs, B is business, office buildings, where elevator lobbies are permitted to be locked. So if you have one of those lockable vestibules in your office building or wherever it is, then you have to have that telephone. In areas of rescue assistance, and in certain communication systems, mostly hotels and stairways. Okay, so there's a new provision also that makes it a lot easier to substitute a smoke detector in a building with a heat detector. If it's something where the accidental activation could be caused by the types of equipment or the types of uses in the room. And here's a provision, and we will be working on some guidance soon with a buildings bulletin to describe what this is. But if I have a garage, a private garage, so a 1 and 2 family house, and it is funny, we go from the high rises to the 1 family houses. That's what's wonderful about New York. So if you're doing an R3 garage that is connected to and attached to dwelling spaces, to an apartment or a house, then there needs to be some kind of an exhaust system activated upon detection of carbon monoxide. and we've had problems with that. Okay, so in the 2008 code, we required carbon monoxide. We're now 908. Carbon monoxide detection systems in E, which is education, I2, hospitals and nursing homes, and I4, which is certain kinds of child care, adult care, I can't remember, I4. So institutional. In 2014, there was a local law enacted by the council, which will become effective in 2014 with this code, which also requires carbon monoxide in any building that contains an assembly space and also is already required to have a fire alarm system. So what that means, and think about this, I have an office building, but there is an assembly occupancy on the ground floor. I have an office building, but I have a cafeteria on the 17th floor. I would not normally be required to install carbon monoxide detection, but this local law requires that any building that has an assembly occupancy and is already required to have a fire alarm system must have some detection for carbon monoxide. We are promulgating a rule which you will see on our website in the next couple months, and it will tell you where those places are. It typically is not in the assembly occupancy itself. It will be around the equipment and things like that, and near where that equipment is that's creating the carbon monoxide. But you'll see that when the rule is enacted. Okay. So smoke control systems, now referencing 92B, that's good. We're also much more specific about when and how to maintain a smoke control system. Before it said periodically tested. What does that mean to you, periodically? When's the last time you periodically checked the filter in your air conditioner, okay? Now it's much more specific. You're going to verify weekly, and that's usually making sure the light still is on, right? Test it annually, turn that thing on, make sure it works, and fully test it every 5 years, making sure it's really operational. Okay. So this is a big deal to those in the fire protection world. The International Building Code has a much lesser standard than what the new 2014 code will have for smoke control systems. How much smoke do you have to evacuate out of a space that is requiring to have a smoke control system? And imagine a smoke control system that's an atrium, a large stadium, some places like that. You've got to get the smoke out. And the 2008 code said that the system has to run for the lesser of two things. 1.5 times the time that it takes to get people out, or 20 minutes. So as long as it runs for 20 minutes and achieves its objectives for 20 minutes and keeps the smoke layer away from the occupants for 20 minutes, you are fine. Now, if you could show that everybody got out in 10 minutes, you could do it for 15 minutes. But if it took people 3 hours to get out, 20 minutes is all you had to do. I don't know, that's what the IBC says, and our fire protection committee and our fire department didn't like that, and you can see why. So now you have to run for the greater of those times. If it takes 3 hours to get the people out of the space, that smoke control system has to operate and function as intended and as designed for those 3 hours, however long it takes to get people out, the greater of those two numbers, okay? Or actually, if it's 3 hours, it's 4.5 hours. You get the idea. Okay, so here we have fire department connections. We used to have fire department connection standards. Those are the fire department connections at the street. You used to see them buried somewhere in NFPA 14. The IBC has moved it into its own section 912, and we have adopted the same. It's going to be in the same place in all the other codes across the country. Why not put it in the same place? We adopt the IBC. That's a great thing. We also have we no longer call it a Siamese connection. The picture here says Siamese, but it will actually be a fire department connection is the more appropriate term, and we're following the modern terminology. Okay, fire pumps. Like the IBC, we have taken it from NFPA 20 and plopped it right in the code where you should see it. In the 2008 code, you only got to NFPA 20 after you've read through some amendment at the end of NFPA 14, and there it was someplace. Okay, so now it's up front. It tells you explicitly, go to NFPA 20 for your fire pumps, and that's where you'll see them, right in BC 913 where you ought to. Okay, fire department approved signage is now required at the exterior and interior access to shareways. You'll see all these old buildings say shaftway, so people don't fall in. And the 38 code had it. 68 code seems to have disappeared. We put it back in because it ought to be there. And everyone puts them in anyway because it's the only safe thing to do. So here it is, it's crystal clear. And there's also some other signage requirements. If you are the architect who has to specify all the signage in a building, there's some new signage there for your specialized equipment rooms. Okay, so let's talk about standby and emergency power systems. Local Law 111 of 2013 went into effect before October 1. It's in effect today. So technically, it's not part of this presentation because these are the changes that go into effect October 1. But we need to talk about it anyway because it's such a large change in the way we do business in New York City. It's a big change. So what is that change? Before we had emergency power for any kind of emergency loads, whatever it was emergency power. After Local Law 111, we have three categories of power generation to satisfy these kinds of loads. Emergency power, legally required standby power. That's hard to say, but we have to get used to it because this is the way the rest of the world has done it. This is the way the National Electrical Code does it. This is the way the IBC does it. Legally required standby power and voluntary standby power. This matches all the codes that are out there. And the way it works is that emergency power is for life safety equipment, has a 10-second startup, which is generally done by diesel only. It has to have 6 hours of on-site fuel unless you're R2. It has to have all of its wiring electrically independent of the wiring for the standby systems and the normal loads. Then the loads that are required under this new system are only three. Exit lighting, which can be batteries usually anyway. Fire alarm and detection have to be connected, and the electric fire pumps and sprinkler booster pumps have to be connected to this. Though there's very limited. Now, you're saying, what about the elevators? What about smoke control? What about all that other stuff? It used to be emergency power with 10-second startup, 6 hours on, all that stuff. Now, no. Legally required standby covers the elevators, smoke control, pressurization, all those things. And that allows fuel cells, natural gas, allows combination with on-site electrical power generation or cogen. It allows 60-second startup. It greatly increases the number of types of generators you can use. The wiring can be mingled with your normal. It changes the way we do things, and that's a good thing. It also talks in BC 2702, which I'm talking about now, optional standby power systems, your data centers, your business interruption stuff, all the things you want. It was outlined in a TPPM, which is now replaced with a section that explains when you want to put an optional system for a building that ought to have emergency or standby power but doesn't. Okay. And if you look at this table, I'm not going to repeat it. It just breaks into the three things. You can, for those of you who are interested, you can look at that. It's very interesting, and you have it in the materials that were provided to you. I will also say about what we did in the 2014 code is update the national standards. Why do we have to update our codes? It's very important to update our codes because the rest of the world moves forward. The engineers and architects have to design to the latest stuff. And here, we didn't want to be left behind in the dust with the 2002 and 2003 NFPA standards. There are new technologies, there are new products, there's new listings. The 2014 code now goes to the 2007 NFPA sprinkler standards, the 2007 standpipe standards, and the 2010 NFPA 72 standards. I will say that the NFPA 72 amendments are going to be done by rule. They'll be published in the next month, and they'll be out there soon. Okay, NFPA 14, no more manual standpipes, fire pumps, we know that. We added NFPA 20, of course, we know that. And enclosures for sprinkler booster pumps, you'll see that in our NFPA 13 standard amendments, and the enclosures for fire pumps, you'll see that too. And that's what I have.